I'm very pleased to welcome you to this lecture by Alexander Nehamas, a professor of philosophy and comparative literature, and Edmund Carpenter, professor in the Humanities at Princeton University, where he has taught since 1990. He is also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Professor Nehamas was born in Athens, Greece, and speaks, in addition to Greek and English, French, German, Italian, and also reads ancient Greek and Latin. And he considers philosophy as a discipline relevant to other fields, such as art history and literary criticism, and has published and widely lectured on topics spanning classical Greek philosophy, later European philosophy, philosophy of art, literary theory, popular culture, and television. And his books include Nietzsche, Life as Literature, The Art of Living, Socratic Reflections from Plato to Foucault, Virtues of Authenticity, Essays on Plato and Socrates, Only a Promise of Happiness, The Place of Beauty in the World of Art, and most recently on Friendship. And he has also translated Plato's work into English. At Princeton, he has chaired the Council of the Humanities, the program in Hellenic Studies, and he was the founding director of the Society of Fellows in the Liberal Arts. So Professor Nehamas, today's lecture is entitled Metaphors in Our Lives, I Love You for Yourself. His talk on friendship and love seems very much needed in our times to remind us on the value of that true friendship can bring, contributing to a rewarding life. In our contemporary social environment, when the word friend or the notion of friend gets very much trivialized, example as used in social networks, it is worthwhile to ponder on friendship's nature, having some real substance and value in one's life. And in an interview, Professor Nehamas said, quote, "What a friend should do is give the other person an opportunity to become themselves. There is a deep common element behind finding a work of art beautiful, loving a person, and being a friend," end of quote. So I'm very pleased to be able to listen to this talk. And recently, I think 5 days ago, he was quoted in the article in New York Times with respect to friendship and his work. So I welcome you to this talk.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for foregoing a beautiful Friday afternoon to listen to me. I'm very grateful to Professor Skorin-Karpov for arranging this visit. I'm grateful to the Provost Lecture Series, and I'm grateful to the Stony Brook University for having me here as a guest. I hope it will not regret it by the time I finish. So, a young woman and her fiancé are discussing planning the wedding. How many friends have you got in all? She asks him as they try to decide whom to invite. I have no idea, he answers. 10 really good ones, 10 more peripherals, a score or so right at the outside edge, virtual acquaintances, a few left over from school, a few more from college, a few picked up at work, perhaps an ex in there somewhere, one or two borrowed or stolen from other friends, an ex-flatmate or two, not as many mates as I used to have, that's for sure. And a little later, he asks her in turn, how many varieties of friendship are there? Here's what she says, loads. For a start, there are friends you don't like. I've got plenty of those. Then there are friends you do like, but never bother to see. Then there are the ones you really like a lot, but can't stand their partners. There are those you just have out of habit and can't shake off. Then there's the ones you're friends with, not because you like them, but because they're very good looking or popular and it's kind of cool to be their friends, trophy friends. Then there are sports friends, there are friends of convenience, they're usually work friends. There are pity friends who you stay with because you feel sorry for them. There are acquaintances who are on probation as friends. There are enough, he finally interrupts her. And in fact, enough indeed. Wit aside, however, this catalogue of friends in Tim Lott's novel, A White City Blue, is not at all unlike the elaborate lists and innumerable taxonomies of kinds of friends and friendships that social scientists have generated over the course of the past 50 years or so. There are, for example, 5 distinct stages of children's friendships, which differ from the friendships of young adults, which differ from those of the middle-aged, which differ from those of the old, which differ from working class, lower middle class, and upper middle class bonds. There are fair weather, heart sink, dangerous, fossil friends, frenemies, and what Tim Lotz calls unfriends, namely the people that when you introduce them, you say, this is my friend. Not to mention, of course, friends who know each other only through the virtual spaces of the social media, and the list of possibilities goes on and on. Now, what I think is that types of friendships are bound to proliferate without end as long as we focus on the patterns of behavior to which friendship gives rise. For in fact, there is, if you think about it, nothing that friends can't be doing together at any time. They can love each other, they can hate each other, they can fight, they can work together, they can work against each other. There's no way to tell just from observing people's behavior whether they're friends or not. In fact, our behavior is never on its own enough to determine whether two people are friends. Any attempt to account for friendship by describing the activities to which it gives rise is bound to miss the most important thing, that what defines a friendship is not the particular actions and activities in which friends engage, but the motives with which or out of which they perform them. Now, to the extent that a relationship expresses friendship, every one of the relationships I mentioned above is accompanied by a degree of affection and goodwill, ideas that go all the way back to Aristotle. When affection is mild, goodwill is limited. When it is deep, goodwill extends much farther. Still, what separates my friends from the rest of the world is not that I'm moved to do good things for my friends that I'm not moved to do for others. Most of us do all kinds of good things for people who are not our friends. Helping or doing good does not distinguish our friends from the rest of the world. It makes the difference between friends and the rest of the world purely one of degree, as if our friends are distinguished by the fact that we are more willing to help in their case. But this difference in degree won't do. Friendship lies somewhere else, neither in the actions of the friends nor in their desire to benefit one another. Now, within the vast range of friendships that we recognize today, what I'm concerned with today are the intimate bonds, the intimate ties that bind us to our best and closest friends. Those friendships philosophers have called character or companion or end friendships. And following Aristotle, most people who write about friendship in philosophy have classified our lesser friendships, other than our very close ones, into two lower kinds. Friendships that depend, they say, on pleasure, and friendships that depend on practical benefit. They supposedly take that view from Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, but in fact, for Aristotle, what he calls philia is not in any way identical with what we call friendship. Philia is the relationships, rather, that are based on benefit or pleasure are for Aristotle, as they are for us, purely instrumental. Those who engage in them, Aristotle writes, are not attracted to each other, not to the self of the friend, but to the beneficial or the pleasant. And if the relationship stops providing pleasure or benefit, it is immediately over. This means that our close friendships, in which we are attracted to each other and not to what our friends happen to provide us with, according to this philosophical view, must differ in kind from our less involved relationships. As one philosopher who's written about this topic has written, in the best friendships, the central feature of the friendship is simply that the friends love and wish each other well as ends in themselves, whereas in lesser friendships, the central feature is the instrumental or means value of each to the other. But that difference, in my opinion, is absolutely crucial. The contrast between loving our friends as ends in themselves for what they are, and treating all the rest of our friends as means to our advantage or enjoyment is profoundly radical in my view, and it suggests to me, very conclusively, that the two types of relationship are so different that the instrumental relationship of friendship for pleasure or friendship for profit are not really friendships at all. Unlike philia, which in fact comes in those three kinds, one's another philia on account of the character of the people, on account of the pleasure they provide, and on account of the profit they provide. Unlike philia, which does come in those three kinds, friendship does not. Friendship, I think, is only of one kind, and it comes in many degrees. Like every kind of love, it ranges from mild affection to stormy passion, and in all cases, it involves what, for lack of a better term, we describe as loving our friends for themselves. Now, to explain what that expression means, or what I think it means, I must begin by admitting that most of my relationships to the rest of the world are instrumental. Not to put too fine a point on it, I use other people for my own purposes. And so does everyone else, and they use me too for their purposes. That is, I know what I want from them, and my interest in them is exhausted by the specific qualities that allow them to perform that particular function. Montaigne, whom I'll come back to again, says it best. The religion of my doctor, he writes on his essay on friendship, the religion of my doctor or my lawyer cannot matter. I scarcely inquire of a lackey whether he's chaste. I try to find out whether he's diligent. And I am not so much afraid of a gambling mule driver as of a weak one, or of a profane barber as of an ignorant one. For the familiarity of the table, I look for wit, not prudence. For the bed, beauty before goodness. In conversation, competence, even without uprightness. Excuse me. Now, what Montaigne wants from these relationships has little or nothing, in fact, to do with the particular person who provides it, which is why he and we can speak of it abstractly. From a lackey, we expect diligence, from a mule driver, strength, and so on. Montaigne is after these particular qualities in themselves. He has little or no interest in the particular people who happen to provide him what he needs. He would be satisfied with any lackey who was as diligent as his current servant and would immediately replace his barber if a more competent one came along. And so, in general, would I. When I needed to have my hair cut, I searched for a competent barber. Beyond being competent and relatively pleasant, it made no difference to me who the barber happened to be. Any equally qualified barber would have done as well. And although our relationship was not exploitative, it was what the sociologist Georg Simmel was the first to call an impersonal relationship. In such an impersonal relationship, what matters is how well the job is done. The other is merely the provider of a service, and the service is what I care about. But some impersonal relationships sometimes develop into something else, and I gradually found myself becoming concerned with aspects of my barber's life that were not directly connected to his professional role, and taking an interest in what we would call his personal life. That, as of course the very work reveals, turned our relationship into something more than impersonal. And for that reason, it was no longer purely instrumental either. Now, I want to point something out. If you asked me why I liked my barber while our relationship was still impersonal and purely instrumental, I would say something like, well, I don't like Thomas himself, but I don't dislike him either. It's the way he cuts my hair that I like. But as our relationship became closer, I would have to answer the same question by saying, well, I like the way he cuts my hair, but I also like him. But the second part of my answer is no answer at all. You asked me why I like Thomas, and I told you that I like him, which immediately provokes the further question, and why do you like him? Here now is a most intriguing point. Although I had no problem with your question earlier, I could say I like where he cuts my hair. Once my relationship with Thomas became personal, I no longer knew how to answer the question. Once I came to like Thomas himself, and not just for what he could do for me, I could no longer explain exactly why that was so. It certainly isn't just because I like the way he cuts my hair, But then, what else is it that I like? True, I could tell you I like him because he's sensitive and intelligent and witty, but these words can only go so far. They're disappointingly vague, they apply to countless other people, and they explain much, much less than we might think. Would I leave Thomas, for instance, if a kinder or a more entertaining barber came along? Would I replace him if a better barber comes along? At some point, he gave me a bad haircut, and my wife and my best friend said, you have to go to someone else. And I didn't, even though it wasn't the best haircut I had, because I had a commitment to him, not just to the professional relationship that we had with one another. And further, why don't you prefer Thomas to your own barber if Thomas is wittier than yours? Try as we might, our best efforts to explain why we like someone are invariably vague, imprecise, and deeply unsatisfactory. They're almost always invariably banal and incomplete, always leaving out what we sense to be the most essential reasons for our feelings. When it comes to any of my friends, and once I've come to like him, my barber is my friend, however casual, it is impossible for me because, as we shall see, it's impossible for me to say, because as I'll say in a little while, it's impossible for me to know exactly why I like or love my friends. What I like about them cannot be separated from their person, and friendship is for that reason completely different from any other impersonal relationship. This means, among other things, that I can't replace my one friend with another as I can replace anyone with whom my relationship is impersonal. No one but my friend herself can play the same role in my life. When my relationship with my barber became personal, even if it didn't ever become particularly intimate, my loyalty to him no longer depended only on his talents. That's why I didn't just move to another barber the first time that I got a bad haircut. And although I may value the intelligence of another friend, I will not give her up just because someone still more intelligent comes along. It is not just intelligence in the abstract, as diligence was for Montaigne. It's not just intelligence in the abstract that matters to me here. What matters, as we say, quite unhelpfully, is her intelligence, or her particular intelligence, or the way she expresses her intelligence. My friend, as we say, equally unhelpfully, matters to me not just for her features, but for herself. So, my question is, what is the difference between my friend's features and my friend herself? What is that self that I'm supposed to be loving? Think, for example, of a friend who no longer matters to you, not because you had a falling out or anything like that, not because you found out things you don't like about her, but simply because, as so often happens, you lost your interest in each other over the years. Think, too, of the features that attracted you to that friend in the first place. She may still be exactly as intelligent or kind or sensitive or whatever she was when you were close, but you are now indifferent to her, and neither her intelligence nor her kindness can rekindle your love. But if these had been part of your reason why you liked her in the first place, why aren't they reasons now, since they haven't changed? We have seen that although I might abandon some instrumental relationship if my needs are better served by another, I would not abandon my friend just because somebody with more of what I prize in her comes along. That is true, I want to say, not only of my close friends, but to a lesser extent of my more casual friends as well. My relationship with Thomas is not as strong or passionate as my closest relationship, but it does involve genuine affection and not just an appreciation of his talents. In other words, there are no pleasure or benefit friendships. That's what I'm trying to say. It is not that our casual friendships are instrumental, while our close ones are not. No friendship is purely instrumental, although, of course, no friendship is completely uninstrumental either. My best friend Tom, about whom I'll talk in a little while, whenever he comes to my house, fixes something there. In fact, I have a closet waiting for him next week. I help him with his clothes. So we both use one another, and that's perfectly compatible with our being very good friends. And when the instrumental aspects of a friendship come to the fore, even the closest friend does become replaceable. If you need an operation and your best friend is a decent surgeon, but as a matter of fact, the world's greatest expert is also available, you would do well to tell your friend to assist in the operation than to be the lead. Instrumentality, in other words, does not separate one kind of friendship, character friendship, from another, pleasure or profit friendship. It's a friendship as a whole, apart from a vast range of other relationships. We love all our friends, not just our closer ones, for themselves, and not only for the specific things that they can do for us. Instrumental friendship, whether based on advantage, pleasure, or anything else, is, in my opinion, a contradiction in terms. The main point I'm trying to make is that if our relationship is instrumental, nothing much about me changes if someone new assumes your role, takes your place, so to speak, in my life. I want something from my barber, a new barber comes along, I have a certain need to get my hair cut, my need, the same need that I had before, is now served better. Nothing changes about me, except maybe that I have a better haircut. But when a new friend enters my life, so does a truly new relationship. And it gives us both something we can't find anywhere else. We are both going to be changed by it. I can have the same relationship with several barbers, but neither Thomas nor I can have our friendship with anyone else. Nor, for that matter, can any two people have a friendship like ours. In contrast to a concrete role, which several people can occupy, our friends' roles in our life are inseparable from the persons they are. No one else, no matter how many features you share with them, can possibly have your place in my life, even if your place is as small as our friendship is casual. I use the word place. A place is just what Etienne de la Boétie, on his deathbed in 1563, asked of his younger friend Michel de Montaigne. My brother, he said, do you refuse me a place? Montaigne did not understand. La Boétie, he answered, I quote him, was still breathing and speaking, had a body, consequently he had his place. But La Boétie was after something else. True, he answered, I have one, but it is not the one I need. And when all this is said and done, I will have no being left. Montaigne, at a loss, could only assure his friend that God would give him a better place soon. It took him more than a decade to begin to formulate what he took La Boétie's entreaty to have been, namely a plea for a place in Montaigne's own life, a plea that the friendship remain alive after his own death and continue to play a role in what Montaigne was to become. Now, Montaigne, of course, is famous for his essays, his book of essays, a book that he tells us is consubstantial with its author, concerned with my own self, an integral part of my life. I am myself the matter of my book, he writes. So, if his best and most intimate friend was to have a place in his life, that place should be reflected in the essays themselves. But just where in Montaigne's life was La Boétie's place? And how could the essays reflect it? It took him several efforts and yet another decade before he found the right answer. Now, Montaigne's first effort to communicate how important his friendship was and why he loved this man was to locate his own essay on friendship, whose hero is La Boétie, at the center of his first volume of essays. Now, at the time that he wrote that, the first volume of essays, what we now know as the first volume of essays, was all that he was going to write. So he puts the essays on friendship and La Boétie at the very center of the essays. In addition, Montaigne began by including a treatise that La Boétie had written, a book called On Voluntary Servitude, in the essay to show what a wonderful man and author Lavoisier was. In his characteristic self-deprecating manner, he likened himself to a painter who always chooses the best spot, namely the center of a wall, to put his painting and fills the empty spaces around it with grotesques, as he puts it, of various kinds. His own essays, therefore, which he describes as grotesques and monstrous bodies pieced together of diverse members without definite shape, having no order, sequence, or proportion other than accidental, his essays would form the background against which Lavoisier's book, which should be in the center of his essay, which was on the center of the book, would allow Montaigne's readers to see for themselves the extraordinary quality of his friend's mind and personality. But then, for what he tells us are political reasons the book had been used in the religious wars of the time, Montaigne changes course. Having announced that he would include the book at the beginning of the essay, he declares at the end that he ultimately felt it would be better to leave it out. And so, although he left his own text intact, Montaigne, amazingly, almost never erases anything from his essays when he revises them, which he does all the time. He only adds, except he says sometimes for variation or in very minor ways, and that's actually very important, but I'm not going to talk about it now. And so, although, as I said, he left his own text intact and preserved its opening exhortation to, as he put it, listen a while to this boy of 16, he removed Lavoisier's text and finally gave us not that text, but only an explanation of its absence. Now, although, as I said, his official explanation was political, the reasons for his decision, I think, went far beyond those political considerations. Had he included on voluntary servitude in the essays, he would have given the book and Lavoisier a distinct, non-integral place in his life. He could take the essay out, and the book would not, Montaigne's book, would not really change very much at all. He also would have allowed his readers to take it up on their own, read it, and come to know its author through it. But many of his readers were unlikely to like the book quite as much as Montaigne liked it. In that case, his attempt to show how wonderful his friend was would have fallen flat. Including the treatise, therefore, would have undermined Montaigne's ultimate purpose, which was to account for his love and give substance to his lament that when Lavoisier died, I quote, "I was already so formed and accustomed to being a second self everywhere that only half of me seems to be alive now." In fact, it would have been perfectly possible, perhaps likely, that even if his readers had liked the treatise, they could still have asked themselves, that's why he liked him, because of a decent book? Not a very good reason. That is why I think he chose to omit it from the essays, even though at the time I think he wasn't quite aware of it. He didn't immediately abandon the effort to convey through his friend's writings what Lavoisier was like and what drew him so powerfully to him. And so, I quote again, in exchange for this serious work, his very next essay offered a group of Lavoisier's sonnets, as he calls them, gayer and more lusty than the treatise. The poems appeared in both editions of the essays that were published during Montaigne's lifetime. But what happens is that he crossed them out in what we call the Bordeaux manuscript. It's not a manuscript, it's an edition of the second edition of the essays that includes all 3 volumes of essays, on which he made extensive handwritten corrections. And every other edition of the essays that we have is based on what we call the Bordeaux manuscript. The sonnets, however good they were, would have done no better than the treatise, and for that reason, they're not there either. All we have is the title of the essay, a dedication to a friend, saying the sonnets you'll read the sonnets now, and then no sonnets at all. Another absence, another hole, another word. And in any case, even if you like the sonnets, you can say that's why he liked them, because he wrote a few decent sonnets. As bad a reason. Montaigne never again tried to account for Lavoisier's virtues by citing his works. The whole effort was doomed. He was the first philosopher to realize a truth that I think is absolutely central to love and friendship, that any effort to explain why we love someone by citing their virtues their accomplishments, or for that matter, anything else about them, is bound to fail. And here's why. The greatest part of Montaigne's classic essay on friendship describes a variety of personal relationships. It goes through master and servant, fathers and sons, siblings, lovers, marriage, pederasty, none of which could do justice to this extraordinary relationship of his, which led, as he puts it, to the complete fusion of our wills. He also came to realize that the nature of the relationship could never be explained by a list of discrete factors. He writes, "It is not one special consideration, nor two, nor three, nor four, nor 1,000. It is I know not what quintessence of all this mixture, which, having seized my whole will, led it to plunge and lose itself in his, which, having seized his whole will, led it to plunge and lose itself in mine, with equal hunger, equal rivalry." In the first edition of the essays, when he's trying to explain to us what his relationship was, he admits defeat. "If you press me to tell you why I loved him, I feel," he writes, "that this cannot be explained." I understand him to be saying that his love could not be expressed in general terms, what he calls just above considerations, since he still thought that La Boétie's sonnets might give an actual picture of his friend. But when, in the Bordeaux manuscript, he excises the poems and abandons that effort as well, he expands that original sentence with what has become, in my opinion, the most moving statement about friendship ever made. So he repeats the words, he never erases, as I said. "If you press me to tell you why I loved him, I feel that this cannot be expressed except by answering, because it was he, because it was I." This extraordinary statement, I think, expresses a kind of total resignation. Montaigne is hereby giving up on the possibility of ever saying explicitly anything genuinely revealing about his friendship, which raises the question, has Montaigne then failed to give his friend a place in the essays after all? And the answer is no. On the contrary, it is precisely by virtue of this most famous non-explanation that Montaigne brilliantly redirects our attention from this or that distinguishable feature of our friends, of his friend and himself, to the irreducible experience of the two of them together. In effect, he says, look at me and at him, look at us both for the answer to your question. But how are we to do this? Where can we find the two friends together in order to look at them as Montaigne seems to be directing us? Where else but in the substance of the essays? It is myself that I portray in this book, Montaigne tells us, and that self is inextricably tied to his friendship with La Boétie. The essays themselves, in other words, are the place he has secured for his friend. La Boétie's place is his contribution to what Montaigne eventually became, what the essays reveal him to be, virtues, defects, warts, and everything else. And that is a contribution, the contribution that La Boétie made to Montaigne. It's a contribution we can determine only by describing Montaigne himself. After all, as he says, they are one soul in two bodies, and it's that soul that we're trying to describe. But to understand Montaigne, to describe Montaigne himself, we must interpret the essays. No interpretation, however, will ever be able to separate out what is due to Montaigne and what to La Boétie, for they are tied together by a Gordian knot, a knot so complex and intimate that it could only be untied by hacking through and destroying it. In the friendship I speak of, he writes, our souls mingle and blend with each other so completely that they efface the seam that joined them and cannot find it again. Montaigne knew that La Boétie's contribution to his life was unique. No one else could have had the same place within it, and for that reason, their relationship could only be described in terms that applied to them only. Perhaps then he was not boasting, and he very seldom boasts anyway, when he claimed that their friendship, quote, has no model other than itself and can be compared only with itself. For no friendship, not just that of its greatest and best exemplars, can in fact be compared to any other. Who else could possibly share it but the friends themselves, who turn out to be what they are through its agency. So, what is it then to love you for yourself and not just for what you can do for me? I came across the beginning of an answer to that question, perhaps surprisingly, when I read a short but brilliantly suggestive discussion of metaphor by the philosopher Stanley Cavell. Cavell wanted to know what we do when we try to say what a metaphor means. His starting point was that we do not try to explain metaphors the same way that we try to explain literal statements. When asked to say what a literal statement means, he writes, I will try, I quote, to put the thought another way, and perhaps refer you, depending upon who you are, to a range of similar or identical thoughts expressed by others. But metaphors don't allow this kind of explaining. We can neither put the thought another way, nor find it expressed by someone else in different words. Instead, what we do, he argues, is to paraphrase them. And the paraphrase of metaphor has a very special feature. Here, for example, is Cavell's paraphrase of Romeo's declaration, Juliet is the sun. He did a great disservice to philosophy with that metaphor, because for the next 30 years, we thought the only metaphors there were like Juliet is the sun, man is a wolf, X is Y, which is really what they're not at all. Fortunately, we're beginning to see that there are other ways to speak metaphorically. Anyway, here's what he says, extremely interesting. Romeo means that Juliet is the warmth of his world, that his day begins with her, that only in her nourishment can he grow. And his declaration suggests that the moon, which other lovers use as an emblem of their love, is merely her reflected light and dead in comparison. And so on. This and so on, I now want to suggest to you, is a necessary part of every paraphrase of a metaphor. It's significant and ineliminable. It signals that the work of paraphrase is never actually finished. As Cavell writes, it registers what William Empson called the pregnancy of metaphors, the burgeoning of meaning in them. The reason is that any attempt to paraphrase a metaphor is bound to be incomplete. The this and so on reveals that I'm aware of the incompleteness. It speaks to my sense that if I were to spend more time with the metaphor, I could come to see in it things I'm unable to see now. Although I will make that effort only for metaphors that matter to me, every metaphor presents that possibility to some degree or other. A metaphor that can be paraphrased without remainder, without the and so on, a metaphor whose meaning we can fully express in different words, belongs in a dictionary. It is what we call a dead metaphor, just like the expression dead metaphor itself. But unlike a dead metaphor, a living metaphor is inexhaustible. And since the full meaning of a living metaphor is always just beyond my grasp, the fact is that I can never fully know what that metaphor means. Which in turn means that I can't use words whose meaning I already know to put the thought another way, to say in these different words what the metaphor means. When literal language is in question, I can use distinct form of words that embody more or less the same meaning and perform more or less the same communicative function in order to explain a particular expression. That is, I can use something else in their place to the same or nearly the same effect. But with metaphor, this kind of explication is impossible. No other words can do what a living metaphor does. A metaphor is irreplaceable. Nothing else can take its place. And so I would like now to suggest to you are our friends. Just as what matters primarily in literal discourse is what the words communicate and not the words themselves, so in instrumental relationship, what matters is the purpose these relationships serve and not the person who serves it. It is what you do, not who you are, that makes a difference to me. You are fungible. I can substitute another person who will do the job exactly as well or better. By contrast, if we are friends, who you actually are makes a tremendous difference. Like a living metaphor, you two are irreplaceable. So when I talk about metaphors in life, it's not the expression I love you from myself I'm thinking about, it's the very notion of a friend. And here is another question. Could our friends be irreplaceable because, just as with metaphors, we never fully know what their role in our life may be? Could our friends be in the sense that metaphors are inexhaustible? Let me try what I mean by means of a story. Several years ago, a very good friend, whom I'll call Tom because that's his name, was visiting me at home in Princeton. And one early, cold, grey, rainy November morning, I was getting ready to take my 10-year-old son to school. Tom decided to come along. And since we were in a hurry and he wasn't going to get out of the car, he said he'll come in his pajamas. Well, my son said, no, that's too embarrassing, can't possibly do that. So he put a raincoat over his pajamas. Okay. Now, traffic at the schoolyard was very, very busy. We were waiting in line to get there and leave our children. When we finally got to the front, I saw that one of my tires was flat. And I stood there, cold, wet, and horrified, because I had no idea what I was supposed to do, under the eyes of many annoyed parents in their cars behind who wanted to go off to their lives. And then all of a sudden, Tom, in dark blue pajamas and a raincoat, and barefooted, leaps out of the car and takes over. Changing the tire turned out to be a very complicated affair, and every few minutes he had to stop working and move out of the way so that a few cars could come by. A crowd gathered. The children mostly stared, fascinating, and in fact my son's reputation went way up after this. They all thought that his father had the greatest friends. Others just watched. Others made jokes. A colleague of mine at the university said to me, "Oh, I love your friend's outfit." Of all that, Tom remained completely oblivious. He fixed the tire, drove with me to a garage, discussed the situation with the mechanic, still in pajamas, raincoat, and bare feet, and returned home ready to get to work, whereas I collapsed in a useless heap. Now, if you ever asked me why Tom is my friend, that story would certainly be one of the things that I would probably tell you. I would also mention his talent for dealing with practical issues or the loyalty that he manifested in the actions that morning, but that would miss the point, which I would try to capture further by emphasizing that, surrounded as he was by scores of well-dressed people about to go to their office or their country club or whatever, his absurd outfit didn't give him a moment's thought. I would tell you that his down-to-earth practical sense coexists with a touching, spontaneous otherworldliness, which, like everything else I've mentioned about him, is completely in character. And so on. Even that, though, would fail. It would fail to communicate that no one else could have done just what Tom did that morning. And if you replied that fixing a tire in a silly outfit is not such a rare feat, nor something that only a friend would do, I would say to you, unhelpfully, that only Tom could have done it in that particular way. A story, a narrative of the sort I gave here, may be more illuminating than a list of features because it is less abstract. But no narrative can stand on itself either. To let you see how what happened that morning both sprang from our friendship and contributed to it, I would have to tell you still other stories, if only to show that what happened that particular morning was rooted in our whole history together and in Tom's character. But even a combination of stories, whatever detail and texture they may add to my original narrative's rough picture, will never be quite enough to explain, either to you or for that matter to me, why Tom and I are friends. However fine-grained, these stories will always describe something general or generalizable, something of which not only Tom, but many others are capable as well. Inevitably, these stories will miss exactly what distinguishes him and our relationship from those other people and their relationship to me, why I'm drawn to him and not to them instead. What matters, as we saw Montaigne observe, is not one special consideration, nor two, nor three, nor four, nor 1,000. It is I know not what quintessence of all this mixture that might explain it, if such a mixture could ever be fully described, which, in my opinion, it can't. Metaphor has brought us into the domain of aesthetics. And I'm tempted to say that there is indeed something aesthetic in my appreciation of Tom's action that morning. Aesthetic in part because what made it so touching is that although it revealed something quite new about him, I could never have predicted that he would have done that thing, it also fit in so well with what I already knew about him. What Tom did made sense. Once it happened, all I could say was, of course. It was both new and fitting. It made him both more complex and more coherent. In other words, it manifested his style. And that is an aesthetic notion. Aesthetic also, because nothing I can say can guarantee that you would also see what I saw in his behavior. Despite all my efforts to explain, you might very well, and without being necessarily wrong, find the event ludicrous, even if you are there that morning. I love your friend's outfit. It is in fact as impossible to explain why someone is my friend as it is impossible. Immanuel Kant had much to say about that in the Critique of Judgment, as it is impossible to explain why I find something beautiful and why I think that you too will find it beautiful when you see it. Nothing I can tell you about Tom's behavior in the schoolyard can make sure that you will see what I saw in it. You had to be there, as we say in those situations, but even if you were there, all you might have seen was a crazy person holding up traffic. So, some people matter to me because they provide me with things I already know I want, and my interest in them, beyond a minimum of necessary respect, is limited. I know that that is not all there is to them, that they have their own lives and loves and dreams, their sorrows and disappointments, but that sort of knowledge is not itself a reason to want to know them better and care about their lives and loves and dreams, their sorrows and disappointments. I'm content to leave the matter there. They are means to my ends, and my interest in them ends with their usefulness. But other people matter to me not only as means, not only for what they can do for me, but also as ends in themselves. I take their desires seriously in their own right, sometimes as seriously, sometimes more seriously than my own, and I'm ready to change my desires to come to want new things, to let their lives and loves and dreams, their sorrows and disappointments affect and sometimes become my own, and so to change myself in directions I can't anticipate as a result of coming to know them. These are the people I love, and each one of them has a place in my life that no one else can occupy. The difference between my feelings for Tom and my feelings for Thomas is not that I like Thomas for his wit while I love Tom for himself. If I care for my barber or for Tom and not just for my haircut or the condition of my house, what matters to me in both cases is something more than our ascribed, that is, our professional, institutional, or instrumental relationship. That's something more which every attempt to explain my feeling for my friends always leave out is what in each and every case counts as the self. It involves a commitment to the future, a sense that there is more to know here, and a promise that what I still don't know will be worth learning. And so, what counts as our own and our friend's self varies with the nature, the intensity, and the complexity of our relationship. My interest in Thomas, like his interest in me, extend to few areas beyond those covered by our professional connections. And we keep silent about countless aspects of our lives that are essential to my relationship with Tom, as many other aspects of his own life that I know nothing about are essential to Thomas's relationship to his friends. So friendship, like every kind of love, requires more than an appreciation of what we already know our friends to be. It also makes a commitment to the future. Saying, "You're my friend," or more generally, "I love you," is not only an expression of how I feel at a certain moment, at a present moment, it is also, and absolutely crucially, a promise that my feelings would last longer than this present moment, and an expression of my sense that our place in each other's life will in some way make life for both of us better than it would have been otherwise. For that reason, we will want to come to know each other better and more intimately. As John Williams, the author of that great novel Stoner, wrote, "Love is not an end, but a process through which one person attempts to know another." This commitment to the future, the hope for a better life that remains unknown for now, is exactly what every one of our efforts to explain the grounds of our friendships always and necessarily leaves out. That is why they're all so disappointingly thin. They all contain an implicit "and so on," an open end or an ellipsis that reveals that the friendship is still alive. It is when that ellipsis disappears, when we feel that we know exactly why we have been attracted to someone and that our future together will be just like our past, that we are in fact no longer attracted to them. This forward-looking element in friendship makes every relationship risky. When I approach you in friendship, I hope that you will make me wish for things I couldn't have wished. I couldn't even have thought to wish had it not been for you. I give you power over myself and trust you not to exploit it. I put my identity at risk because despite the certainty that love inspires, it is impossible to know what our relationship will ultimately mean for me and whether it will be for good or bad. Nothing ensures that my feeling or my judgment is right, that I won't one day realize that you have actually been a disappointment, even a harm. Worse, nothing ensures that our relationship won't harm my judgment and my values as well, making me, in the end, feel happy to have become someone I would have hated to be had I not submitted to you. This commitment to a still unknown future that can't possibly be described is what every effort to explain why we love somebody always leaves out. So the self is elusive because it is always unfinished business, but also because, since different aspects of our personalities are involved in our different friendships, to love all my friends for themselves, as I do, is not to love the same thing in all of them. The self we love in each particular case consists of different features of our various friends and, crucially, of what we suspect or hope that they can be as a result of our interaction, and also what we suspect or hope we will be as a result of our interaction. Moreover, my friends have other friends, and they love one another for themselves, and the features their friends are focused on are bound to be different from those that are important to me. If I and someone else are both your friends and love you for yourself, the self we love is bound to be at least a little different. For the same reason, my own self, the self my friends love, is different within each one of my various friendships. Because of the desire to create a different, unanticipated future, friends give each other power over each other and put their respective identities in question. That is the reason we don't ultimately know why we love them. We do love our friends for reasons we don't rightly understand, but when we approach one another in friendship, we don't take ourselves for granted either. We come to each other with a sense that our friendship will allow us to function at our best, improving what we already know of ourselves, engaging parts of which we have been unaware, and leading us to new features that we hope will also be to the good. A hope that very often does not come out true. However convinced we may be that everything will work out well in the end, our coming together is always a commitment to an uncertain future. Our lives and the lives of our friends are indissolubly mixed, the more so the closer we are, and our lives develop, for better or worse, in ways and directions made possible only by our relationships with one another. So, that I love you for yourself because of who you are is only a partial truth. It also, crucially, depends on who I happen to be as well. The full truth lies only in Montaigne's non-explanation. If you press me to say why I love you, I will say that cannot be explained except by saying, because it is you, because it is I. Thank you very much.